If the people who should know you best have ever undervalued you, then this tale is for you. If you have ever had to prove yourself in a quiet way while remaining silent, please like this video, subscribe to the Reddit Family Tales channel, and leave a comment. Lean in now. Allow me to share with you how I came to understand that my greatest strength was silence. People often say that some wounds resonate more than they bleed. Additionally, the sound remained constant in my situation. Unfortunately, Juliette. Never arriving, always tagging along. Is she Camille's sister? Oh, her. The words didn't come across as cruel. Not completely. However, some people's polite dismissal and weak sympathy for you hurt more than anything that is spoken out loud. I recall when it initially occurred, standing next to Camille in one of her many bright moments. I was 17. She was delivering her address as valedictorian. With pride, our mother was crying. With joy, our father's chest swelled. And me, the camera was in my hand. Nothing changed. The focal point was usually Camille. Camille was always brilliant, bright, and in the spotlight. In the hallway, I was the silent little light bulb. Existent, helpful, but seldom honored, and I accepted it in the same way that some people accept the weather, which is beyond their control and immutable. I wasn't idle, though. Not at all. I created something that Camille couldn't see while she showed off her degrees and expensive coats. They all disregarded it. I went to law school in silence and graduated without a celebration. I lived in a one-bedroom walk-up with a heater that clanged like a ghost. In the pipes, worked late, saved obsessively, and skipped vacations. They believed that I was merely making do. They were unaware of my advances. My first duplex was in poor condition. The roof looked like a patchwork quilt, the paint was peeling, and the hedges were overgrown. However, I saw through it all. I used my hands to wipe it up. I rented both units. Reinvest. I didn't tell them. I knew they wouldn't listen, not because I felt embarrassed. Camille would give our parents framed photos of herself in Tokyo or Paris for their birthdays. I would discreetly set the baked pastries next to the foie gras. Gifts from Camille were on exhibit. I politely consumed my own pastries, then promptly forgot them. But I continued to construct. One property after another. Several properties were registered in my name. Several properties fall under my limited liability company. They insisted that I get serious about life, yet I saw the values accumulate and the numbers increase. The family gathering followed. It was Camille who called, claimed that we were meeting to align on a joint family investment. Her tone was formal and sophisticated, as if she were speaking to a boardroom rather than the folks who changed her diapers. I arrived there carrying the same leather bag I'd owned for years and my favorite gray coat. I sensed the scan. Our mother's kind grin wavered for an excessive amount of time, and Camille's eyes darted over my sneakers. Every one of them was present. My cousins, aunts, uncles. The tone of Camille's crimson blazer matched her self-assurance. I stood beside the coat rack at the distant end of the table. Raising her glass, Camille stepped up. I just wanted to say how proud I am of everyone here before we start. We're all doing so well. The word all remained in her voice, and I could feel its weight. Excluded, not giving in. Simply performative. The knife then appeared. Of course we may have to exclude some members from the business side, she remarked, laughing lightly. We really can't let the impoverished influence real estate choices, you know. Everyone chuckled, even my mom. They seemed to be overcompensating because the sound was harsh and too loud. I didn't chuckle. I didn't wince. I folded my hands in my lap and gave a small smile. What was in my bag was unknown to them. Although they referred to it as a family meeting, Camille's victory lap always felt more like it. Now she stood at the head of the table, using a sleek tablet to navigate through slides, while speaking in the same professional tone she used when making investor pitches. "We have a unique opportunity," she stated. "However, we require significant funding. Actual players, actual players." "Not me" was the code for it. I said nothing. I had always. However, I could see it in their eyes and the way they scurried past me when Camille solicited feedback, as though my quiet was expected or even necessary. They were unaware that in my world, remaining silent was a tactic. I allowed the cinnamon to stick to my mouth while I took slow sips of my tea. My mother shifted her scarf across the room, then leaned down to whisper something to Camille. They both grinned. That smile, which was confident rather than spiteful, was what hurt the most. This type of smile asserts we are aware of who matters. As usual, my father remained silent. He didn't often take sides. His silence, however, differed from mine. He was surviving. Velvet-wrapped steel was mine. Camille started outlining the numbers: capital gains, interest, and equity. Then, facing the entire room, she raised her head and uttered, "Naturally, everyone is aware of who will contribute the most value in the situation. Not everyone at this table can contribute after all." There was a ripple of laughter. The laughter was restrained, courteous, yet sufficient. Uncle David was grinning as he shook his head. Aunt Laura laughed too from behind her wineglass. They didn't have to say anything to me. Juliette is not involved in this. The message was clear from the start. Juliette is not wealthy. It wasn't the initial instance. The chosen one was always Camille. She was given the first vehicle. I occupied the most spacious area. She received the highest praise. They expected me to not cause trouble and to take things easy. She brought suit-tailored boyfriends home. I brought long nights and books home. She was able to take trips to Europe. I took on a second job to help cover Dad's medical expenses. She sat close to our mother, whispering and clinking forks over jokes even during family dinners. I pretended not to notice as I filled water glasses while seated at the far end. I never envied her, though. Not once. Not even when she shared pictures of rooftops in Paris while sipping champagne and grinning in silk. Because I secretly knew something that she was unaware of. Spotlights are blazing. Roots spread. Flash was what they desired. I went with a foundation. Consequently, she turned to face me and remarked, "Just loud enough for everyone to hear?" Juliette's heart is undoubtedly in the right place, but let's face it, this isn't really her arena. Every eye was drawn to me. I grinned. I wore a smile that anticipates, not one that reacts. When they were assessing me based on my quietness, they failed to recognize that silence can be the calm before a seismic event. In my suitcase, too, that contract. It was more than paper. As they laughed, it was the sound of all they had missed. It was extremely warm in the room. Fragrant static of tension, increasing perfume, and the smell of roasted garlic. Naturally, Camille had taken center stage, leaning toward her like flowers to the sun, and pointing to the screen with all the flair of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. She tapped her tablet and stated, "Here's the projected return. Assuming a collective family investment of $400,000, we'll have full rights to the southern plot just off Chesapeake. I already have a designer lined up and we'll call it a legacy property, something we can all be proud of." Everything. Once more, that word. It was like a slap to me. Devin, her fiancé, sat next to her and obediently nodded. He was tall, smooth, and exuded confidence and pricey aftershave all the time. His fingers brushed against his tie as if he were polishing his pride, and he leaned in to whisper something that made her chuckle. Then the time arrived. At last, Camille turned to face me and said, "Juliette, would you like to do something? Or perhaps simply ignore this one?" She did not intend to be mean when she said it. Her gift was that she presented condescension as an invitation. I took a while to reply. Realizing that your family saw you as disposable at worst and ornamental at best made you feel incredibly alone. This feeling was similar to that of a plant sitting in a pot in the corner of the room. You were never included in the conversation, yet you were always present. Devin grinned. He continued, "No offense, Jules, as those who say no offense are always out to get you. But this kind of thing might be a bit beyond your capabilities," he remarked. "Real estate, I mean. Money, legal organization." He infused his sentences with an air of false charm. It seemed like mild teasing rather than layered humiliation, as the room laughed quietly. Not even my mom turned her head. Like a kid waiting for the storm to pass, she folded her hands in her lap. My chest began to boil up, but it wasn't fury. It wasn't a feeling of shame. Clarity. That's when I knew they didn't despise me. They failed to notice me at all. They saw me as the background noise in a room filled with Camille's cheers. That's when I made my decision. I didn't do it to shield myself. I wasn't there to plead for a seat at a table that had never accepted me. I simply straightened my posture a bit, dug into my backpack. Allow my fingertips to land on the well-known edge of the substantial manila folder, which feels warm to the touch and solid like the written word. Seeing the action, Camille arched an eyebrow. "Jewel, do you have something to share?" I grinned as I quietly and carefully glanced up at her. No smirk. I maintained a steady, silent smile that never wavered. Then I said, "Actually, I do, loud enough for everyone to hear." The room fell silent. The glass's ice also appeared to cease clinking. I didn't speak louder. I didn't have to. The environment changed as soon as I placed the folder on the table. The transformation was not dramatic, yet it was adequate. Camille's silk blouse ceased to ruffle. Devin's stance straightened, but his smirk remained. My mother's tentative gaze was once more on me, as if she were attempting to understand a language she had never tried to master. Slowly, I opened the folder and slipped a clean set of papers in Camille's direction. The papers were thick notarized and stamped. The legal office was still a little warm from the early sun. "Here," I said in a composed tone. "This is the entire agreement for a 48-acre Louisa County property. Closed this morning, paid in full." Camille took a while to move. She glanced to the top of the page, then her eyes narrowed and flared. I don't get it." I carefully turned the second page for her, showing her the valuation, the deed, and the appraisal. "It's the area immediately off the lake, the one that was proposed for your legacy project by your designer." She flushed. Not furious. She wasn't exactly infuriated. The blush resembles the realization that one has been playing checkers in a room with the last chess piece in the other's grasp. I reclined in my seat and allowed the quiet to descend. The weight of what they failed to notice was something they had to confront. "That land is already being developed," I added. "I've teamed up with a tiny but respectable group. A number of eco-residences are being constructed. Keep quiet. Upscale, long-term profits." Uncle David bent over. "Hold on, have you closed already?" I gave a nod. "Alone?" One more nod. Camille's mouth parted, then shut again. Her eyes were calculating, and I could see it. The incredulity battling with shame. Everyone in the room was holding their breath. Devin's confidence paled a little, and he was now silent as well. Smiling less this time, he took up one of the pages, glanced at it, and then looked up. He muttered, "I assumed you were employed by a non-profit organization." I answered. "In addition, I studied zoning law during the evenings. I flipped modest houses on the weekends. Slowly, with caution, for a decade. I also gave it time to settle." The truth doesn't have to be blatantly obvious. It simply must be finished. At last, my mom said something, gently. Why didn't you tell us at all? I gave her a kinder look instead of one filled with rage, sadder. Because nobody ever inquired. It was there. There was no conflict or disagreement. There was no physical altercation. Between the wine glasses and business proposals that had never mentioned me, there was only a truth that was left on the table. I turned to look at Camille again. The crimson lacquer on her fingernails glinted in the chandelier as her hands remained motionless on the edge of the page. You tried to purchase the land, didn't you, gently? I inquired. She didn't respond. She was not required to. I slowly and steadily got to my feet, gathered the folder. I put it back in my backpack. I then left one sentence in the dining room before I departed, one that would endure much longer than any agreement Camille could ever make. Your money wasn't necessary for me. All I wanted was my place at the table. I didn't slam the folder. I didn't speak louder. I didn't bring up the years they ignored me, or the dinners where I was invited more out of duty than invitation. I simply allowed the significance of that pact, and all it stood for, to speak for itself. Camille remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the now empty space where the folder had been. You orchestrated this, she said at last. You held off until now. I gave her a gaze that was neither triumphant nor cruel. Just be honest. No, I replied. I had this arranged for me. It's not my fault that you're looking for the first time. That was the part they never grasped. It wasn't my intention to disprove them. I built something that was impervious to theft, ridicule, or downplaying. I created something significant without seeking permission. Devin mumbled something about a phone call before getting up and excusing himself. Devin was unaccustomed to being on the losing side of a discussion. In an attempt to recover the room, Camille tried to straighten up. However, the magic was no longer in effect. Uncle David coughed uncomfortably. Aunt Laura poured a glass of wine for herself. Even my mother, who always handled Camille's interference, sat quietly while fiddling with the edge of her napkin. I remained upright. My heart stopped racing. Actually, I had never felt more at ease. It felt as though I had more room to breathe. It felt as though my back had regained its strength. I said, I never asked to be the center of attention. Even when I wasn't shining, I just wanted to be treated like I mattered. I gave that some thought. Allow it to linger there as a release rather than a challenge. The tone of Camille's voice had tightened. You ought to have spoken up. I smiled at her, not in a condescending or resentful way, simply exhausted. I did, I answered. You simply weren't paying attention. I took one final glance around the table. The white rose centerpiece, the linen napkins, and the unopened appetizers, which were still lovely but getting cold, felt like set pieces from a play that I had finally left. I'm not upset, I declared. I'm not here to make fun of anyone. I believed that perhaps this time would be different, so I came. It wasn't. Oddly enough, that was acceptable. I experienced a transformation within myself. It was not a dramatic moment. It was more like a silent untying of a knot I had been carrying for years. My coat was still hanging in the doorway, the same dull gray color as before. I softly buttoned it after slipping it on. I made one last turn around before I left. My father, who had been silent the entire time, looked up. His gaze locked with mine, and he added, I always knew, in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't ostentatious. However, it was sufficient. I gave a nod. I then departed. When I left, I didn't slam the door. I simply let it close behind me. It was gentle and final, like the last breath I had been holding for a very long time. The air outside was colder than I remembered. The sun began its gradual descent, bathing the street in a warm gold that made everything seem quieter and softer. For a minute, I just stood there breathing, not making any plans. I'm not acting, simply existing. I strolled to my car, a simple, dependable old sedan with a stumbling engine and anecdotes in the upholstery. With my hands on the steering wheel, I slid in and gazed straight ahead for a while. Then I grinned. I smiled not because I had won, but because I was no longer required to. My cousin Becca sent me a note later that week. She had always shown me kindness in the way that individuals do when they're unsure of their own rights. She sent a brief text. "What you did still has everyone talking. You truly shook them, in my opinion." I took a while to reply. What else could I say? Could I explain that my goal wasn't to disturb them? Did I act this way to maintain my own stability? Camille contacted me a few days later. Camille reached out to me via formal email. On upcoming real estate projects, she wished to explore the possibility of a collaboration. I closed the email after reading it twice. She hadn't apologized, not at all. Although I had learned not to confuse interest with respect, I wasn't upset. I therefore ignored the email. I then resumed my work. The 48 acres of peaceful potential that I had purchased were already undergoing a survey. Walking the waterline's boundaries with a clipboard and a sense of tranquility I hadn't experienced in years, I spent my mornings on site with my hair tied up and my boots dusty. I had a modest staff, those who paid attention. These were people who believed in something without needing to be persuaded. Others find me appealing. At night, I drew crude sketches of the common gardens, strolling trails, and outdoor reading nooks while enjoying mint tea at my tiny kitchen table. For me, it was more than simply real estate. It was a silent, architectural uprising. And news spread gradually. I was no longer the forgotten one. However, I wasn't the focus of every spotlight either. This balance is what made it so beautiful. They conversed. I had a job. They conjectured. I made partnerships. They patiently waited for me to act. However, I had already. Not with a vengeance. It wasn't accompanied by any noise. In person. I developed into the person I'd always envisioned myself to be, one who didn't require approval from others to be correct, but rather one who proved them wrong. Almost exactly 1 year later, I went back to the land. It appeared clearer and cleaner now. They had pruned back the wild brush. Gentle curves built the gravel road between the young trees. Cabins had started to take shape. They weren't ostentatious or flamboyant, but they were intelligent. Made to last. Near the hill's edge, right before the trees gave way to a gentle drop overlooking the lake, was a bench I loved. That morning, I sat there holding a cup of tea. In the cool air, steam ascended, slowly curled like a ribbon, and then vanished. The wind was light. Morning light rippled and shimmered in the sea below. The soil smelled alive from the previous night's rain, like something starting rather than ending. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I knew without having to look. Camille's voice was softer than I remembered when she said, "Juliette." I glanced behind me. She was wearing a simpler outfit than normal. No high-end shoes or makeup fit for a movie star. She was wearing only jeans, a blouse, and a look of reluctance on her face that I hadn't seen since we were kids. Without asking, she sat next to me and walked gently. We were silent for some time. We simply listened to the birds, the low hum of the building down the hill, and the gentle rustle of branches. "I didn't know you could build something like this," she continued. I took a drink of my tea. "You failed to look." She gave a nod. "You're correct." She paused for one more moment. She went on, "I wasn't very kind to you. That day, or if I'm being honest, most days." I took a while to respond. It is not necessary to express forgiveness verbally. Forgiveness occasionally exists in the silence shared by two individuals who, after everything, choose to sit next to each other. She gazed at the woods outside. "This place is lovely," I remarked. "It's quiet." She gave another nod. "I'm envious of that." We were silent for a long time again. Not tense, just the truth. "I meant what I wrote," she said, "about working together." Gently, I turned to her. "I hope all is okay with you, Camille. However, I created this space on my own terms. It's the one location where I can be myself without having to compromise." For once, her eyes were devoid of defense as she gazed at me. No angle, just understanding. "I'm glad for you," she muttered. Furthermore, it didn't feel like a victory at the time. It was a sense of closure. We sat for a long time. Thereafter, she got up, nodded slightly to me, and continued walking down the path without requesting anything else. I sat on the bench by myself, drinking my tea. Slowly, the sun rose. Its warmth was a silent blessing as it caressed my skin. I shut my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of empowerment instead of feeling small. I didn't feel left behind. I didn't think I needed to convince anyone of anything. I simply was here, alive, rooted, enough. And I had this notion as the wind blew across the long grass-still water. I'm going to call it that. Not to bring my ordeal to the attention of the world, but to remind myself of my transformation. The immobility I experienced was unwavering. They were unprepared for the depth they encountered. I constructed a house using strength and stillness. And lastly, tranquility.